Hello, my name is Damon Means. We're recording this presentation as well. This is our presentation of the preliminary budget for the 24-25 school year, the 2024-2025 school year. Our administrative team and I will present our preliminary budget and talk through all the details. The preliminary budget book can be found on our district website as well if you would like more detail. As a school district, one thing is for sure. We know that all of our community members care deeply about our public schools, and that everyone, every citizen, every taxpayer wants to make sure that our children receive the very best public education that they can receive through a very fiscally responsible pathway. And it is through this moral obligation and commitment to our next generation that we developed the 2024-2025 budget. What's critical for our citizens to keep in mind is that we are facing a budget shortfall over the next 5 years. We've identified that we have a $9.3 million budget shortfall for our 2024-2025 school year. We are anticipating, and these are all projected numbers right now, but we are anticipating ongoing shortfalls if the state legislature continues to fund schools the way that they have since 2009. So it's really critical for community members to continue to advocate at the state level to make sure that these anticipated projected numbers that you see for the 2025, 2026 school year and so on are not as large as we are anticipating. We are hopeful that our advocacy at the state level will bring that number down. But unfortunately, we are locked in on a $9.3 million shortfall for the 2024-2025 school year. So when you look at the history of budgeting in the Wauwatosa School District, there's two things that come to mind. The first is that our district has a great pride in having balanced budgets. And those balanced budgets have led to us even creating a very large fund balance. But the challenge and the complexity of that pride that we have around having a balanced budget is that we have not invested properly in our instructional materials, in compensating teachers, making sure that we're investing in our facilities. So there's a mismatch, if you will. There's a dissonance of what our community aspires to be in regards to being a school district and how much we are investing. And we have to come to grips with what do we want to become moving forward as a school system. We can't continue to have pride in having a balanced budget and not investing in the very foundation that we need to have to be the school district that everyone aspires us to be. So let's step back for a second. The state budget is the core of all school funding. And when you look at the 2023-2025 state biannual budget, there was a lot of excitement among school business managers and superintendents and school board members across the state of Wisconsin. We knew that the state legislature had a historic surplus of money available to them. We anticipated that they were going to invest in public schools for the first time since 2009. In fact, the Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials, WASBO, they had a proposal that they presented to the state legislature, where they said that the state legislature should invest a total of $1,500 over the 2-year period to increase the per pupil dollar amount for schools in Wisconsin. Here in Wauwatosa, we did not go forward with a proposal matching WASBO. We suggested that the state legislature should at least give us an additional $1,000 over the 2-year biannual budget. Unfortunately, that did not happen. You'll see the dotted line on the presentation there. That is what actually, that's the dollar amount that the legislature actually invested. It was somewhere around $650 over a 2-year period, about $325 over the 2-year period. We were asking for $1,000. The WASBO, the Wisconsin Association of School Board, or excuse me, School Business Officials, they suggested that it should be $1,500, $1,500. So the fact that the legislature provided that level of investment in our public schools is something that we should just pause and think about for a second. You will hear from the legislature that they have invested a historic amount of money in public schools. Is that true? Yes. But does that dollar amount meet the need that school districts all across the state have in ensuring that we are producing the type of services we want for public schools? And the answer is clearly no. And so I think there is, it's an important point to know that we are in trouble. We need the state legislature to help us with the ongoing investment in public schools. So, in light of the lack of investment from the state legislature and a commitment from our school district to make sure that we continue to provide services and provide programs for our students, we made the decision to utilize our fund balance to offset the budget shortfall that we had for the 2023-2024, and the upcoming 2024-2025 school year. You'll see here that our fund balance went up to almost 50% of our operating budget during the 2021-2022 school year. That's what I meant earlier around this pride that we have in Wauwatosa of being fiscally conservative in regards to utilizing dollars. But that money, the money in fund balance, wasn't helping children. It wasn't helping us retain high quality staff. It wasn't helping us secure and procure really needed new academic materials. And so last June, when we realized that the state budget was finalized, I made a presentation to the board, and I shared with the board and the community in June of 2023 that our plan was to use fund balance for 2 years, for the 2023, 2024, and 2024-2025 school years. After those 2 years, we would have to develop a long-range budget plan. As leaders in this school system, we consistently hear from our staff members that they want us to invest more in their compensation. We continuously hear from our community members that they want us to retain our high-quality teachers. We continuously hear from our curricular leaders that we have dated curriculum and materials that we're serving our children with. We continuously hear from our administrators and our counselors that there's not enough mental health support in our schools to help our children. This ultimately comes down to an investment of resources. And so we realized that we needed to use our fund balance to bridge our situation for a 2-year period. Where we go beyond these 2 years, it will require a deep, rich community conversation. So when you look at the budget development calendar, we're at the midway point of developing the calendar, or excuse me, the actual budget. We started this process back in December and January, and through the months of February, March, April, and now in May, we've continued to do things such as determine our open enrollment number and the number of open enrollment seats we will create. We made a very important decision in April of deciding what our staffing plan would be. Our staffing plan is nearly 80% of our overall budget. And so that decision in April was critical to our overall development of this budget. And so we're very proud of the document that we are presenting to you tonight. We believe that this budget, preliminary budget document is the most transparent and the most detailed that we've been able to present to the Wauwatosa community in many, many years. And so with that in mind, I'm going to transition things and introduce our chief of talent. Her name is Sarah Zelazowski. She's going to dive a little bit more into our staffing plan, which again is critical to our budget because it represents nearly 80%. Sarah?
Thank you, Dr. Means. Good evening. As Dr. Means indicated, our staffing costs, both salaries and benefits, make up the most significant portion of our budget, as is the case with all other school districts in the state of Wisconsin. You saw in the previous slide the calendar that indicates where our budget planning cycle starts and finishes, and a couple of key points in between. And as being responsible for about 80% of the budget, our staffing planning process mimics that same calendar. So we're basing our staffing plan on a number of assumptions as far as our student enrollment, which can vary widely. So in that time from November to December and January, we are looking at what our predictions are for student enrollment, especially for JK, who will be spending their first year in our classrooms, as well as then looking at historical trends for other grade levels. Our staffing plans, both our teacher staffing plan as well as our educational and operational staffing plan, are both available for the current year as well as 2024-25 on our district website. And as we are endeavoring to go ahead and make our budgeting process as authentic and transparent as possible, we do the same with our staffing plan. In terms of not only the intentionality of our class sizes by grade level across our schools, as well as our service loads for special education and other services in the organization. We have also determined what a foundational level of staffing is for all of our schools, elementary, middle, and high school, which is also represented in our staffing plan. We also then know that if schools demonstrate additional need, what other areas we might need to access to provide the support that schools need, again, to support students as well as their success. As part of the budget planning process for this year in particular, the third resource that's listed on this slide is a comparison of district level staffing from when Dr. Means began his work in the 2021-22 school year to present. And so it compares each of our divisions, academic performance, pupil and family supports, finance and operations, and human resources in terms of the FTE or the positions across all of our categories and classifications in the district by those divisions. And really, you'll see in the auxiliary document that there has been an addition of staffing since 2021-22. Again, and that has been at the charge of the board in order to be able to reach our outcomes for students in terms of ensuring exceptional experiences, eradicating inequity, eliminating disproportionality, as well as exceeding proficiency for all students. We have dedicated staff to create the systems and structures that make those things possible. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Luke Pinion, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the successes we've seen as a result of that investment.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, Luke Pinion, I'm your Chief of Pupil and Family Supports. And I want to speak a little bit to this slide. These are data that my team and our school teams look at quite often. What you're seeing here is graph numbers by month of student and office discipline referrals that are classified as major. When students get an office discipline referral, they may be minor, meaning the teacher has managed that in the classroom, or they may be major, meaning they were sent out of the classroom and the administration navigated and moved through that discipline in that situation. The yellow line that you're looking at is from last school year, 22 of 23, by month, the count of major discipline referrals across our system. When we look at the blue line, we are seeing quite significant and unprecedented reductions in major discipline referrals, which is exactly what we want to see. There are a lot of hypotheses in terms of why we're seeing this reduction. Certainly, many of the staff that we've added to the school in terms of social emotional support, that being mental health specialists, social emotional specialists, or deans of students, as well as a lot of the great work our staff and our teachers are doing, as well as a lot of the structures and systems we've put in place to make sure we're being proactive, we're getting ahead of behaviors, and we have appropriate responses that are shown in research to work and do best for students. So although it's something we really want to celebrate, we are happy to see this trend continue throughout the whole year. We know there's more work to be done, and we know we're still working at reducing and eliminating our disproportionality because that is not represented in the slide, but we wanted to highlight that we are seeing some great results when it comes to student behavior in the classroom. And we know that that leads to a greater academic outcomes as well. All right, I will hand you back to Dr. Means.
Thank you, Luke. There's a question that you may want to ask at this point in the presentation. That is, why invest? Why invest in the public schools? Let me tell you why. We're seeing a lot of success with our students academically. We're seeing a lot of success with our students from a behavioral standpoint. Things are working well in Wauwatosa. we are on the uptick. We are on a very good trajectory of a positive trajectory. Our kids are performing well. It's just not anecdotal. You'll see on this slide where we're seeing an increase in academics. We're seeing a decrease in behavioral issues. We're seeing an increase in attendance. This is an investment that would serve the community well if we can continue to move along the path that we are moving on. When I arrived in Wauwatosa, the school board asked me to be strategic. The school board asked us to be audacious with our vision for what we wanted for our kids and our staff here in Wauwatosa. I am proud to say that we're moving in the right direction, but we need the continued investment in support of our community to continue to achieve these great results. But I want to give you more information. So I want to ask our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Nicole Marble, to go a little bit deeper in terms of what's happening so well and so good in our classroom. Dr. Marble?
Thank you, Dr. Means. Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Means said, Nicole Marble, Chief Academic Officer. Thank you for being here this evening. To piggyback off of what Mr. Pinion said about systems and structures, academically, we have also put a number of systems and structures and clarity around expectations in place for our educators in the classroom, as well as our building administrators. We've spent a lot of time unpacking what our instructional expectations are across the organization, and we've started really with our building administrators so that they can give really target-pointed feedback to our educators in the classroom as they're in those classrooms on a regular basis. In addition to that, we have also clearly articulated our curriculum review process. And so we have a very predictable and replicable and describable curriculum cycle where we are able to get in a pace and cadence of being able to touch all of the curricular areas that we have to serve our students and have that breadth of education for them. We have started in with our core content areas as the most critical pieces, and some of the content areas such as science that have not been updated in over 13 years in some circumstances. So again, as Dr. Means said earlier, woefully unattending to our curricular needs because of the pride that we had in making sure that we were being fiscally conservative. So that's a system and structure that has already, we've started to see some really strong results. One of the things we've seen some really strong results on already, in particular at the secondary level, is with our pre-ACT and ACT scores in science in particular. We've done some very strategic work in science in our high school and middle schools, in particular our high schools, and we are seeing increases in those results as well. And we just got some of those preliminary results around ACT and pre-ACT very recently. So something that we're really excited about. We have also, what I also keep hearing from a lot of our staff and a lot of our families too, is how are we going to also help close gaps? So we, in addition to a lot of the instructional expectations and professional learning that we've done to help all students, we've also developed some really strong systems and structures to make sure that we are able to support our students that are most vulnerable in their academic gaps. So our students that are currently below the 10th percentile in their reading and mathematics achievement. However, I say all of that, and I'm really excited about the work that we're doing and the results that we're seeing. In fact, we have been able to exit about 30%. We've been able to move 30% of students out of the bottom 10 percentile this year that at one point in time found themselves into the bottom 10%. So we're seeing good results. We have more work to do. We want to see 100% of those students be able to move out. And ultimately, it comes down to what Ms. Elizoski is talking about as well, is staffing. So last year we had the individuals that serve students at the bottom 10 percentile are academic specialists. Last year we had 6 of them in the whole entire organization. We were able to strategically look at some of our title funds that we get and repurpose some of the FTE that we had at the middle school level in order to now have 16 in total. That is still not enough. I was actually at our listening session at Underwood last evening, and I had the opportunity to speak with a mother at one of our elementary schools, and Her daughter is currently fluctuating between the 11th and 12th percentile. And she says it is unfair that my child cannot get the support that students underneath the 10 percentile are getting. So I say all of that because we need more. And actually there is an act passed last July, Act 20. It's all about reading proficiency. And that act is asking for us to have specialized plans for any student that's underneath the bottom quartile. So who's going to serve and support those students that are in between the 11th and 25th percentile? That's an extra task, an extra responsibility that we are putting on top of our classroom teachers, on top of serving them on the day-to-day basis. So we need more support in order to continue to move those, to help our students be able to read and be mathematicians. So I say all of that. We've had some successes, but we need to invest. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Means.
Thanks, Dr. Marble. So one question that we get in the community often is, what happened with the ESSER positions? As you remember, coming out of COVID, the federal government provided ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds. And with the ESSER 3 funds, we decided that it was important to reinvest in our students as they were transitioning back into our schools. And so we created a number of positions. We created something called elementary behavioral specialists. We created 6 of them. And these individuals work with our elementary schools to make sure that children who need help as they're learning their new environments and learning how to be good citizens within their elementary schools, that they have someone who can coach them up and to help them understand what are appropriate social mores and norms. There's also secondary mental health specialists. What our students were telling us and what our staff were telling us is that counselors at the secondary level often are academic counselors. They are doing a lot of academic planning. So to have someone available from a mental health standpoint is really important for our students. And so we created those positions. We believe that those positions have helped us a great deal in bringing down some of the behavioral challenges that we observe. We're also proud of the fact that we were able to create diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility training and assessments. We were able to purchase 2 passenger vans, very normal passenger vans. We were able to make sure that we were able to accumulate and obtain a social emotional learning curriculum. So we're not just placing that challenge on our teachers, but there was a curriculum available to them. We created cell phone lockers. We were hearing from our staff members that the issue of cell phones in classrooms is a challenge and that they needed a way to monitor and to manage cell phones. We went out and we invested in alcohol, tobacco, and other drug professional learning for our staff, which is a very important component of things. We used our ESSER funds, I believe, in a very efficient and effective way to help stabilize our organization and to help students come back into school on a full-time basis. But please remember that the core of the ESSER funds, the reason why the ESSER funds were given to public schools was to assist children to come back to school. And so we believe that the investment of the elementary behavioral specialists and the secondary mental health specialists was critical in the success that we're seeing now. So critical that in this staffing plan that we have for the 2024-2025 school year, we're asking, and it has been approved. The board has approved this staffing plan that we're continuing to keep these positions on staff because we've seen such success. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Zelazowski, who will talk more about employee compensation and human resources. Sarah?
When I started work in the school district just about 2 years ago, I was really excited because the board had just approved a new compensation system for teachers in the organization. And I am equally proud to say that over those past 2 years, our teachers in particular have received an average increase of about 21%, which sounds like a crazy big number. And it needed to be, because teachers in Wauwatosa were among the lowest in southeastern Wisconsin. We knew based on some data related to comparable salaries and benefits. Still, with that 21% increase, our teachers are almost at the median from a compensation and a benefit standpoint. So we've made a lot of progress, just as you heard from Mr. Pinion and Dr. Marble in terms of academic and behavioral outcomes for students. And we have some progress yet to make. Within the 2 years that I've been here, I think I've worked with every employee classification in the organization in terms of comparing salaries and aligning salaries to be competitive with our peers. This year's budget was based on a 4% average increase for employees in the organization. And that's reflected in the new salary schedules that were approved this year for our recreation and technology department staff members, which was based on local comparables, as well as new longevity increases for our support staff positions like administrative assistants and educational assistants. Our teacher structure already had some longevity incentives within it. And last but not least, we also looked at regional comparables for our associate principal positions. Those positions in particular are the future leaders of our organization, and we were woefully behind our peers. And so this year's staffing plan, as well as compensation increases, also included adjustments for those positions as well. Salaries are only one component of employee compensation. And when we look at our benefits, the most significant benefit we offer to all employees is our health insurance plan. And just like all employers across the nation, we too are experiencing an increase in health insurance costs associated with our employees. And so in thinking ahead and in working with a new benefits consultant that we started with in May, we're really looking to think about what our long-term perspective is, and really looking to prioritize and promote the access and use of primary and preventive care for our staff members. Not only are outcomes better for any condition when you identify them early or prevent them from occurring at all, but the costs are lower with those early interventions. And so really looking at that long-term focus in terms of how can we promote access to primary and preventive health care. And really that framework helps us look at controlling long-term our employee benefits costs. One of the ways that we are strategizing to do so is to look at other options for employees to access care through a near-site health clinic that would again have lower expenses than occur on our health plan. This slide, I don't expect anyone to be able to read verbatim from where you're sitting, but it's really important information. It represents the fact that the Wauwatosa School District pays, or employees in the Wauwatosa School District pay less than all but 4 other school districts in southeastern Wisconsin based on their out-of-pocket benefits expenses. So Wauwatosa, if you're looking at the chart, is the 4th from the right. And basically it's a chart of out-of-pocket costs, including deductibles, co-pays, prescriptions, all of those things. And in order to keep us at a competitive level from a cost standpoint, as well as a valuable service, we're really going to need to think about how we go ahead and strategize related to provider networks. What are alternative benefit plans and options? How are we considering employee shares of premiums and deductibles? And how are we aggressively looking at pharmaceutical tiers and discounts? All of these things that our other school districts in southeastern Wisconsin have had to do before us, we've been very fortunate to maintain the quality of benefit and the cost of the plan that we have so far. But we are now starting to look at those things as well. This next slide, based on FTE or position or full-time equivalent, this slide shows the number of positions across each of the areas. And so you see that really our greatest investment in terms of number of positions in the organization are positions that face our students and our families. They are far and away our classroom teachers, And then fourth from the left, you also see our special education staff. Those are the positions that, again, directly provide services to our students and families to go ahead and help our students achieve success. And you can see then proportionately the percentage of other positions in the organization. Similarly, based on spend or by budget amount, you see as well that the vast majority of our compensation dollars in the budget are focused on those service and student and family facing positions, classroom teachers and special education staff members. Again, giving you a perspective of where those compensation dollars are spent with that 80% of our budget. And next, I'll be turning it over to Mr. Keith Brightman, our Chief Finance and Operations Officer.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
And I'm going to start our budget discussion. So I'll have the next maybe 8 or 10 slides with our enrollment trends. And enrollments drive our staffing needs. It also drives the resources the district has on an ongoing basis. And so what you don't see on this chart is a long-term look at enrollments. We had a pretty sophisticated enrollment study done last spring, which predicts that we'll have a slight uptick, flat to slight uptick in enrollments over the next 10 years or so. And that's a good place to be from a resource perspective as we get per student funding from the state level within that. But as we look in as this year to next year, we see a slight dip. We're seeing some lag in our 4K, JK numbers that we haven't experienced before. The hope is that those numbers increase over the summer. Sometimes they do, but for right now, we're looking at a more modest look at that. But we're fortunate in Wauwatosa that we do have flat to slight increasing trend. West Allis, West Milwaukee, just to the south of us, has a quite downward trend, both historically and in the future. So it's a better place to be where we're seeing the Wauwatosa long-term trend. Dr. Means mentioned a $9.3 million shortfall for the 24-25 school year. This is really driven and part of year 2 of the state biennial budget process. So we're locked in. We know what the resources are for this next year, unless something were to abruptly change at the state, which we're not expecting. As Dr. Means mentioned, we're using fund balance for the last time next year. After that, we either need to make reductions or increase the revenue side through local decisions that will be coming within that. We have $325 per student. That was part of the state biennial budget on the revenue limit increase. That's a per student increase that every district in the state gets, that flat same dollar amount per student. We did a 4% compensation increase for all employee groups. That doesn't mean every employee got 4%, but we spread that 4% over the employee population. We did a 4% increase to our health and dental plans. We know medical trend is higher than 4%, which is going to drive some other decisions on plan design and looking at benefit design, not just for next year, but in the future. And we looked at doing higher levels to that increase, but that drives a bigger shortfall and a bigger problem to have to find from a financial perspective. So the 4% is a balance with having a high level plan design, but also addressing the budget shortfall needs. We increased class sizes slightly, not much for next year, which drove 15 FTE of staffing reductions. So nothing to get alarmed about from a parent perspective, but it did save some staffing positions. We then repurposed those to other positions that were added during this current year. So it really netted out, but allowed us to do some better things by having that slight increase to class size. Sarah mentioned the increase or the investment to a near site clinic. We looked at having an on-site clinic, and that requires a pretty significant capital investment to convert space and to hire in a clinic staff and that kind of thing. We think a better model to at least start would be a partnership with a near site clinic. So we're looking at those options currently within that. The Champions program space, we started that this year. It's been extremely effective for students that need kind of a break from the regular routine. They go to a more controlled atmosphere. The intent is not to keep them there. It's to get them back into their regular school setting when they're ready to do that. But we do want to build out that space or make that more of a permanent type of location for that group of students to be able to continue to thrive within that. We increased programming to better support students and families. A lot of that is continuation of the ESSER fund positions that we had into next year's budget. And we wanted to, again, look at the flat to slightly increasing enrollments, which again is a good picture to have in the current climate and in this area of the state. Really hard to see on this slide. It's in your bigger budget book and in the slide deck that you have in front of you. But we've laid out each fund. Our general fund is where you see most of the district operations. Everything, most of what you think about when you think about the school district is in Fund 10. Fund 11 is grants. And so that's a fund that we're really closing out as a local decision to have a separate way to capture those federal grants. But it gets kind of difficult when we're communicating internally and with the community on where the federal grants are. So we're collapsing that into Fund 10, which makes more sense for future budget planning. Fund 21 is where we put donations, grants, and gifts that come into the system. And so there's no local tax incentive for there. That's just a way to kind of segregate those funds for specific purposes. Fund 27 is our special education fund. That's where costs are captured for all special education services. A couple decades ago, that was all wrapped into Fund 10, and the state split those out really to better align with federal grant funding that goes along with special education too. So good way to separate that. There's a transfer from Fund 10 to cover the local costs of special education. That's increasing and significant. We'll talk a little bit about that. But that's the local portion of Fund 27. Fund 38 is non-referendum debt. The district does not have any of that currently and not projected to have that for the next budget cycle. Fund 39 is referendum debt. So when you think of the 2018 referendum, the debt service to pay the principal and interest comes out of that fund. It gets levied and then spent out of that fund to pay that debt service payments. Fund 41 is for capital expansion, capital improvements. The district has put away funds into Fund 41 and spend those into capital improvements as we have the need and we have the financial capacity to do so. Fund 49 was used for referendum runout or construction, and so that's been spent down to zero now, so that's no longer being utilized. Fund 50 is food service. Everything that is accounted for within that is more of a proprietary fund, so a business-like function within the district. And we expect that program to at least break even from one year to the next, so it's not a draw on the general operations of the system. And then Fund 80 is community service, which is for us mostly the rec department that you see. Wauwatosa is somewhat unique. There's about 18 other districts in the state that have the rec program as part of the district versus being part of the city or municipality. But we have that within our system, about $2.8 million in revenue and costs for Fund 80 within our system. Well, you'll see that being higher than most if you do comparisons within that. So back to Fund 10, you can see that we have a beginning fund balance of $26.6 million estimated for July 1 coming up in this next fiscal year. We have about a $9.3 million shortfall between revenues and expenditures, which will pull that down to $17.3 million at the end of next fiscal year. Is our estimate with that. Our comfort zone ends there with using fund balance to help balance out a budget. And so we need to, again, either make expenditure reductions or look at increasing the revenue side to be able to address long-term budget planning. In the budget book, pages 32 to 44 have the financials for each one of the funds in a little bit more detail than we're going to go through tonight. We're happy to take questions now or later on those, but we didn't want to kind of have our eyes roll back with too many spreadsheets on the screen, so we're going to keep it more high level for tonight. When you look at our general fund revenues, as you would expect, our general state aid as well as the tax levy make up the most significant portions of the revenue we receive. When you look at the 11,033, that's the open enrollment revenue coming into the district. You probably picked up that we're one of the highest participants in open enrollment across the state, with about 1,029 students this year in brick and mortar schools as part of that program, and that's higher than the norm. And so we won't talk about that tonight much, but we've been looking at solutions for that to reduce that amount. Our state revenues total about $26.7 million. That's general aid that goes along with the tax levy and revenue limits, but it's also other state aids in the picture. And then we have other things, some federal funds, the title funds. I think Dr. Marvel mentioned some of that, being supportive for some of the functions in the district, and some other funds that we have within the mix. So that's really makes up the general makeup of our general fund revenues. You'll see this similar picture for every district across the state. They just may have a different picture for how much is tax levy versus state aid, depending on how that makeup is here in their system. On the expenditure side, as you might expect, based on some comments we made tonight, about 8% of our budget between Fund 10, the $49.4 million in staffing costs in Fund 10. We then have benefit costs in Fund 10, and then most of the transfer to Fund 27, which is the green slice of that pie, is also in staffing. So about 80% of our budget goes towards staffing within the system. The remaining 20%, we've really done all we can do to constrain that, optimize that, be efficient with that, and there really just isn't more room to really have there. You think of the utilities for this building, we just went through a proposal today to try and reduce costs, both on the general fund but an overall energy costs. And it's about a $200,000 energy bill for just this building on an annual basis. So that kind of thing we really don't control. and is part of that other 20% that you see in the system. So the tax levy, that's, when you think of your own property tax bill, this is what comes to mind. And there's a school portion to that. There's also a technical college portion, a city portion, and a county portion within that. But just the school portion is what we're talking about tonight. And a total tax levy for next year of $62.013 million. And you can see the makeup is our referendum approved debt levy of $11,246,000, and that supports those principal and interest payments that are part of that debt schedule. We have 1.4 million for Fund 80 or community services. We have a small chargeback. These are unpaid taxes that then get put in the next year's revenue cycle, and $49.4 million approximately of the revenue limit tax levy, which you would think of as our general operations, to total up to that $62 million amount. Important to note that we are estimating this, and we mentioned that, I think earlier, that October is when the state releases the actual numbers for these things. And so the original budget gets adopted at the end of October once we have these. We're estimating those until we get to that point, and do the best we can with that. The tax rate is dependent on fluctuations to overall property valuation in the system. And so we're estimating a 2.5% increase from this last year's overall valuation to next year. We hope that's a little bit on the conservative side. Last year, we saw about a 19% increase, but we all know that we've seen historically high property valuation increases. But we also have a lot of new market rate apartments and redevelopment going on, and all that factors into this assessment. So if we have a 2.5% increase to our property valuations, that will put us just under 9.3 billion with a B of overall valuation. And that's significant because just a couple of years ago, it was under the $7 billion mark. So ththings are really ramping up, and Wauwatosa is very healthy from just a property valuation standpoint, which then helps drive down tax rates. So we've seen a downward trend there. So with the 2.5%, we're expecting a flat tax rate from this year to next year of $6.68. If the percent increase on the valuations is lower than that, the tax rate may be a little bit higher. If it's higher than the 2.5%, it would then decrease that further because you're dividing the flat tax levy into a higher property valuation within that scenario. Another way to look at the tax levy is if you own the average home in the system, you'd be kind of in this area. So we estimate that being about $350,000. And so with a 668 or a flat tax rate from one year to the next, your property tax bill on that home would be flat. Your home may fluctuate within that market or within that assessment. But if all things being equal, it would be a flat tax on the school basis of $23.38 this last year and $23.38 for next year. You can see a little trend too on the previous tax levies overall, going from 58.955 million up to 60.5 million and now 62.013 million within that. So as I mentioned before, this is the last year we're going to recommend to the board that they utilize fund balance to navigate this fiscal year. Beyond that, we have to look at revenue generation or expenditure reduction or a combination of the two. And it doesn't get much more complicated than this. On the revenue side, it really takes an operating referendum and community support to help drive that. If that isn't the case, then expenditure reductions, and it really does come from the staffing side of that 80% of our cost structures within the system within that. But we're looking at all these different areas as we plan into the future budget starting in 25, 26, and beyond. So this chart represents the key funding formula for schools in Wisconsin, not just Wauwatosa, but all 421 across the state. It's called the revenue limit, and it was put into place in 1993 by Governor Tommy Thompson. So think way back to that duration. It was put into place as a compromise between Democrats and Republicans. Prior to that, local school boards across the state might have double-digit levy increases every year. That became somewhat unsustainable from a financial model because others weren't doing that. Created inequities. So they put the current funding formula into place. And the whole goal was to align funding increases, the blue bars, with the orange line, which was overall CPI or inflation as it was happening from one year to the next. And so as you can see from 1993 to 2009, it was developed and used as it was intended to align CPI with those revenue increases. In 2009, we can remember we had the Great Recession, state revenues were down. And so the state underfunded not just public education, but really all areas of the state budget. Then Act 10 came in 2011, and that was a big drop in-school revenues, again, across the state, not just in Wauwatosa. And they also effectively did away with collective bargaining. So it was much more control at the local level on benefit designs and compensation structures and all those things that went into those collective bargaining agreements. My understanding, and Dr. Means, I believe too, back at that time was that was seen as a reset, in quotes, on school funding. And then we'd go back to that realignment of CPI-based funding that was part of that design. As you can see, that's just never happened. And in fact, there's been years with zero funding increases. So that has an exponential effect in driving further cost reductions, further reductions across the system. And so we're not in year one of a shortfall situation. We've been good at hiding that and making things work over time, as have most districts across the state, but it gets too tight at some point. We really felt in the current state biennial budget, the state had the money to give the CPI index and restart that trend again, and it just didn't happen. And so if it didn't happen this last state biennial budget, it's hard to believe that it would happen in future budgets. And so if we look at that lag over 2009 to now, that's a $3,300 per student gap in what could have been, should have been, keep pace for all the things that we need as a system. We then look at how we benchmark our per pupil revenue authority compared to our peer districts. And, it's just fascinating still to me that Wauwatosa is at 11,019 in 2024 in the current school year. And our neighbor just to the west of us is 12,352, or about $1,300 higher than we are. And the only reason for that is Elmbrick locked in $1,300 higher back in 1993. They didn't do an operating referendum. They haven't done anything that we haven't done. It's just where you locked in. It was a local decision at that time to lock in low for Wauwatosa compared to some of the neighboring districts. And so if we had the Elmbrick funding per student just by where they locked in, we'd have about $7.3 million of additional revenue every year since 1993 to current. So that's 30 years of that kind of loss in funding just by where things were locked in. So the major portion of our shortfall is really coming from that decision as you look back in history. Then we're going to take a quick look at special education funding. So if you look back at the left side of the chart back in the early 80s, special education costs were lower. There weren't as many needs identified or as many funding or requirements in that area, but the reimbursement level from the state was much higher. But as the needs have gone up and costs have gone up, the state funding has gone down at the same kind of trend or the opposite trend within that. Part of our request for the state biennial budget this time was to return to a 60% reimbursement threshold and get things back to where they are in most states, other states, and where Wisconsin has been historically. That just didn't happen either. There was an increase from 30% to 33%, so a modest increase, but it didn't solve, and that would have been about $3.8 million help to address our shortfall that we have within our current budget and next year's budget system. So we have the legislative platform going back to a pretty simple funding stream. We had 3 requests. It was to keep CPI-based funding or put that back into place. It was to increase the special education funding. And there was another caveat to that to really increase the Medicare reimbursements. Because right now the state reimburses Medicaid costs that we provide for student care. And it turns out the state keeps about 40% of those costs. And so we just wanted the state to reimburse fully for the costs we have within that system. So again, remember, we're one of 421 districts that all have the same funding model, but we all have different per pupil revenue amounts. So that's where it gets kind of convoluted or confusing within the system. But all districts have the even increase of that 325 and whatever the revenue limit authority is to help balance out their own budgets. And we're seeing a lot more districts go to operating referendums. We had 90 plus districts go to referendum this last April. I'm going to project that number to maybe double for this November. And we're just seeing that become a much more increasing trend. There are many more districts getting into a cycle of every 3 to 5 years re-upping an operating referendum in their scheme. Wauwatosa has not done that yet, but that may be a need that's coming. You then try and reconcile the cost side and the revenue side, I guess, with cost comparisons. So this comes from the latest DPI audited data from 21-22. So this is prior to adding some of the staffing levels that we talked about tonight. But Wauwatosa ranked absolutely last on the spending per student with an even comparison with all other CESA 1 or Milwaukee area districts with that comparison. So you can't expect the highest results at the lowest spending. you have to be somewhere within kind of a modest median range within that. I think that's it. Transition to Dr. Means.
So this concludes our presentation for the 24-25 school year budget. But you may be asking yourself, what about the 2025-2026 budget? What does the future look like for school funding in Wisconsin, in Wauwatosa, for my child and my school? We know that the state biannual budget for the 2025-2027 years will come up and they will start having those discussions at the state legislature level in January of 2025. We know that this time next year, we will be in the throes of working with our state legislators and trying to figure out what does the next 2 years look like. What we are proud to tell you tonight is that we have a plan in place to maintain staffing and programming for your children going into the 2024-2025 school year. But school funding and making sure that we fund not only the Wauwatosa School District, but all of our public schools in Wisconsin well is something that is in peril right now, and that we need the public to continue to pay attention to as we move into the future, because ultimately there will be difficult decisions that we'll have to make if, as a local community, we don't make the investment in our public schools. So, as we mentioned earlier, we're almost 2/3 of the way through the development of the 2024-2025 school year budget. We are making this presentation tonight. This is a new addition to the budgeting process. This is our second year of having this hearing, and we're so thankful for everyone here in the audience this evening. We will present this plan to our school board on June 3rd, and we'll have that ready for the board and present it to our board on June 3rd with the intent of having the preliminary budget passed by the board on June 10th. Just of an important note, the board will be making a very important decision about the future of our school district on June 17th. On June 17th, there will be a special board meeting where the board will make some decisions around the most recent conversations related to our TOSA 2075 task force, our administrative recommendations for TOSA 2075, and all the listening sessions that they've been having. With that information in hand, we would like to thank you for attending this evening. I'm going to look into the camera. I want to say thank you to everyone who's watching on this recording. I want to thank our administrative team for putting all of this together. There are other opportunities for the public to engage. There are always public comments that you can type into and write to the board directly. There will be a school board meeting on June 3rd and again June 10th where public comment can be taken. There will be a listening session on June 5th at Lincoln Elementary School. So there are ample opportunities to engage the Board of Education, our school district, prior to that important date of June 17th. But the reason why we're here tonight is for the preliminary budget for the 2024-2025 school year. We're proud of the fact that we have a balanced budget thanks to the ample and rich fund balance that we have. We believe that we have a very detailed plan. Please read the preliminary budget document in its totality. I think you'll get all the information you want about our budget situation in that document. Until next time, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here.